Now we will use the MSA for the continuous data, which the name of the technique is called gauge RNR. Can someone tell me what does RNR stand for here?
Repeatability and reproducibility.
Yes, repeatability and reproducibility. It is not reward and recognition. It is repeatability and reproducibility. Okay, so there's a different sort of rules that we follow here. The rules there talks about that it should be greater than 90% to pass the MSA. But for doing gauge RNR for continuous data, there are certain rules. Okay, so we will do the hands-on for gauge RNR once we cover the Minitab exercise as well for other tools as well. So we will cover the theory part today, and we will do the practical later for this. Okay, but just to tell you the rules for gauge RNR, when do we call the gauge RNR is to be good to go or not? The first condition says the number of distinct categories should be equal to or more than 4. Okay, what is the meaning of distinct category? Which means the equipment which I'm using to measure, which I'm measuring should be able to calculate at 4 different levels. Okay, which means it can infinitely divide into 4 different categories. So for example, my equipment would be able to give me the readings for meter, for centimeters, for inches. So it should be at least be able to get into 4 different levels. Okay. Second condition says the percentage contribution should be less than part to part variation. What is part to part? Part to part means transaction by transaction, which means my total variance, percentage contribution variance should be less than part to part variation. Okay. The third category says that the tolerance that I would expect, if it is less than 10% between 2 different appraisers, I would say it is good to go. If it is between 10 to 30%, I would say it's a kind of a caution. I would still accept it, but if it is greater than 30%, I would reject. So likewise, in attribute agreement analysis, we had only one rule. Here we have 3 rules. Number of distinct categories should be equal or more than 4. Percentage contribution should be less than part to part variation. All these calculations will come in Minitab. So we don't have to do it manually here. It's just that the 3 rules we need to remember, we need to look at when once a gauge RNR is calculated. And third, the gauge RNR tolerance percentage should be between 10 to 30%. If it is greater than 30%, I will not accept the gauge. I will say that my gauge RNR, my measurement system is not good to go. Okay, so we will do the Minitab hands-on exercises for this as well, wherein we would be able to see that what is the current MSA for my continuous data. We will do it later, but I just wanted to talk about that what is the current level of it. Anybody has any questions? Because now we will be entering, so we will take a break at 9:15 today, and we'll use these 10 minutes for any question anybody has on the measure phase or whatever we have covered.
Simarpreet, can you repeat the first 2 points of this slide, gauge RNR, gauge RNR?
Okay. You want to talk about the first 2 rules that I talked about?
Yes, I didn't understand this categories and contribution part.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, even I also lost.
Yeah. So typically gauge RNR is a measurement technique like we do it in a measure phase, wherein we generally focus on ensuring that whatever equipment I'm using, that equipment should be precise enough that it should be able to give me a lot more calculations or a lot more accurate units that I'm able to do. Okay, so if I have a manual data and I want to apply gauge RNR, okay, basis that data only, it would calculate the distinct categories. Okay, my distinct categories means whether that particular data that I have should be able to infinitely get into 4 different sort of levels. That is what I'm referring to distinct categories, which means it should be greater than 4. So whatever data that we throw, Minitab would be able to calculate the number of distinct categories. So I would not accept if my distinct categories is less than 4. All these 3 rules has to be passed before I conclude that my gauge RNR is good to go. Okay. So that's what is distinct category. Second rule talk about gauge RNR as a percentage of contribution should be less than part to part variation. Part to part variation means transaction by transaction variance. Okay. So for example, you monitored first transaction and then you monitored second transaction. What is the variance? So vis-a-vis the transaction by transaction variance and the total variance. My total variance should be less than my part to part variance or my transaction to transaction variance. Okay. That is, I also need to look at. And third category, which I think we are pretty simple, the tolerance should be between 10 to 30%. Okay, so majority of this stuff is used when in the manufacturing side of the world, when we have lot many trials and lot many operators to look at, wherein we will do the gauge RNR and wherein we look at these 3 conditions. So when we do the Minitab hands-on exercise, then you'll be able to understand it better with the interpretation that Minitab throws. But just want you to remember these 3 categories, three golden rules of gauge RNR. Is it all right?
Yeah.
Okay.
One question is that if my tolerance is between 10 to 30%, should I need to check my process or my appraiser?
I would still give it a feedback to the appraiser, but I would not be too much worried about it because up till 30% is accepted. Because when you do the gauge RNR, it is not always accurate because continuous data has a lot of variation. It can never be same. So even if it is, let's say if Simar says 30.9, so let's say Simar and Anand are measuring the weight of a mobile. Okay, Simar says the weight of mobile is 30 grams, and Anand says or Kishore says 29.96. It would throw some kind of a variation. So that's why up till 30% is accepted, because we will not be always accurate. Because as I said, number of distinct categories can be many more. It can be 20.38, 20.38777. So there would be too many distinct categories. And that's the reason, coming back to your question, I would still accept 30%, but I'll give a feedback to the operator to be extra cautious next time.
And is this acceptance tolerance level vary from organization to organization, or it is a standard for any organization?
It's a standard. It's a standard for any sort of industry.
Okay.
It's a standard. I can be more stringent also. I can say that I can only accept 20%. But yes, the standard says this. We can modify as per our convenience also.
Okay.
Okay.
And Timur, when you go for the next practical section, this number of distinct categories should be equal to or more than 4, and gauge R&R percentage contribution. Could you please show us a live example? When
Yes, absolutely.
These
absolutely.
2 points still it is not going in.
We will.
That will
Yes.
give more clarity, right? Whatsoever doubts we have, that would be clarified.
Yes. We will do the Minitab hands-on for gauge RNR, and then you will be able to look at different examples and see that what sort of numbers it is throwing. Yes, of course that's something which will be doing. Okay. So that's what is part of the measure phase. There is one more thing that's part of the measure phase that's quite optional, but still I want you to know it. That's a quick win opportunities. Quick win opportunities are those opportunities which is kind of a low hanging fruit, because now you have kind of reached the measure phase and you are towards the end. So you would try to look at, is there any low hanging fruit? Is there any small opportunities which can be kind of implemented which can yield some kind of a result. Okay, so the quick win criteria are that they are very easy to implement. It doesn't require a lot of approval. It doesn't require any sort of cost. It doesn't require too many approvals, too many agreements, and it can be easily replicated. So if while doing a project in the measure phase, though we haven't done any sort of brainstorming, we haven't done any types of analysis yet, but just looking at the process while discussing with the team members, if I identify any sort of quick wins, I would go ahead and implement it. So this is a quick win template that we have, which talks about what is the source of that opportunity that you've identified, whether it is first identified during a team meeting, whether it was identified during a process walkthrough, what is a concern that you identified, what is the solution that we have, then we give whether it's easy, fast, cost effective, within team control, and whether it is easily reversible. So I would recommend everybody, when you're doing your project or when you're looking at any sort of opportunity, even before doing any sort of analysis, you would find many opportunities. These opportunities could be basic hygiene. Maybe there is no tracking mechanism to track that metric. So you probably introduce the dashboards, okay, the daily dashboards. One opportunity could be that there is no maker and checker in place. Okay, you can have that quick win being implemented. So depending upon the opportunity that we have, we can have those small quick wins being implemented, which doesn't require a lot of approvals and which can get maximum implemented within 2 weeks time that you can do. So that is something which I would recommend for you to do.